Why did he ask for her? That was the question Sarah kept replaying in her head the moment James Morrison had stepped into her father's gun shop, examined a rifle she had cleaned, and looked at her as if she were hiding something more than oil-stained hands. He wasn't supposed to notice her at all. She was just the girl in the back room, the one who scrubbed barrels and polished bolts while others carried stories of hunts, competitions, and distant battlefields. But he had noticed. And now, days later, she couldn't shake it. The morning sun slanted through the workshop window, laying strips of gold across the steel and wood lined up on her bench. She tied her hair back tighter, pulled on her safety glasses, and set another rifle down with a careful click against the table. To anyone else, it might look like ordinary work, brushing, oiling, checking. But to Sarah, each rifle was a puzzle, a locked box waiting for patient hands to turn its tumblers. At 19, patience was not something her friends associated with her. Amanda teased her for spending weekends with solvents and rags instead of laughter and plans. Most of the girls they knew were slipping into internships, cafes, or apartments with posters taped crooked on the walls. Sarah stayed here in the shadow of her father's shop. She stayed because her father's hands, once steady, shook now with arthritis. Every small motion pained him. The rifles had needed someone else. She had stepped in quietly and simply never left. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't what she had imagined her life would be. Yet there was an order to it that felt right. Until Morrison's words. "You did this work." His tone had been somewhere between surprise and respect. "This is exceptional." And just like that, something shifted inside her. She didn't say it aloud, but she had always wondered. Was this all she was? Just the quiet girl behind the counter who cleaned other people's weapons, who watched talent pass by her window but never carried it herself. The memory clung to her as she disassembled a bolt carrier, laid the polished parts on a cloth, and wiped the sweat from her forehead. Her world had been safe, measured, precise. But that flyer he had pressed into her hand had been anything but. A match, a test, precision rifles, distances she couldn't even imagine, 600 meters, 800 meters farther still. It had sounded absurd. She had never thought of herself as someone who shot. She maintained. She preserved. She respected the tools but didn't wield them. Yet when she had gone home that night and typed long-range precision shooting into her laptop, her world cracked open. Videos showed bullets arcing across landscapes, invisible paths marked only by time and wind. Men and women pressed flat against the earth, waiting, calculating, pulling a trigger with breaths that seemed to last forever. She hadn't meant to stay up past midnight, but she had. And when she finally shut the screen, her reflection in the dark glass startled her. Her face was the same, but her eyes, curious, lit with something restless, were not. The next morning she came to the shop early. She looked at the rifles with a new hunger. Not how clean can I make this chamber, but what could this do in the right hands? Her father noticed. Miguel had been watching her more closely since Morrison's visit. He said nothing at first. He simply handed her new sets of brushes, let her ask about barrel harmonics and bullet weight, and answered with the patience of a man who had grown old around gunmetal and oil. "You're different these days," he finally said, wiping his own hands on a rag, thinking of something. Sarah paused, fingers resting on a rifle's stock. She wanted to answer honestly, but honesty felt fragile. Instead, she just shrugged. "I'm just curious." Curiosity. It was such a small word for what was happening inside her. By Saturday morning, the choice was already made. She climbed into her pickup truck with a knot in her stomach and the Desert Valley flyer folded in her pocket. She didn't tell Amanda where she was going. She didn't want to explain. She just drove. The range was tucked in a desert valley, as the name promised, surrounded by scrub hills and a sky that went on forever. When she pulled up, she nearly turned around. Men in their 40s and 50s unloaded heavy cases from the backs of SUVs, their rifles gleaming like machinery designed for another world. They adjusted tripods, whether meters, scopes worth more than her entire truck. She stood frozen for a moment, jeans dusty, hair pulled back in a plain ponytail. She felt like a trespasser. Then Morrison waved. "You came," he said, almost as if he had been expecting her all along. Sarah swallowed hard and nodded. He guided her to his shooting mat, pointed out the rows of steel targets that glittered like coins in the far distance. 300, 600, 800 today. Good day for learning. Learning, the word steadied her. She knelt beside him as the first competitor took the line. Sarah had expected something loud, brash, maybe cinematic. Instead, it was quiet, methodical. The woman, Diana Chen, Morrison whispered, moved with the care of a surgeon, adjusting her scope, watching the wind flags ripple faintly, scribbling notes in a small book. Then the shot. The crack of rifle fire snapped against the valley walls. Sarah blinked. Through the spotting scope Morrison handed her, she searched for the target 600 meters away. She almost missed it, the tiny black circle sprouting a hole near its edge. Sarah felt her chest tighten. How did she know where to aim? She asked, voice hushed. Ballistics, Morrison replied. Everything matters out here, wind, temperature, even the rotation of the earth if you're reaching far enough. She's not guessing. She's calculating. As the day went on, Sarah couldn't look away. Every competitor carried the same stillness before the shot. Some failed. Some triumphed. All seemed bound by rules she was only beginning to grasp. By noon, she found herself standing closer to the line than she had meant to, asking questions she didn't expect herself to ask. About barrel cleanliness, about bullet drift, about why one man's shots curved wide while another landed steady. Diana herself joined in, smiling warmly, complimenting Sarah's meticulous cleaning work. "You've already got the foundation," Diana said, almost offhand. "Most shooters take years to understand their equipment as well as you do." Sarah tried to laugh it off, but the words burrowed deep. When she drove home, the desert still fresh on her skin, her thoughts were tangled. The shop, the rifles, the years of quiet repetition. What if they had all been training without her knowing it? What if her hands, steady and stained with oil, were meant for more than polishing steel? That night she didn't sleep. She lay awake, replaying the shots, the sound, the calm before the trigger. Her chest buzzed with something she couldn't quite name. Fear maybe, hope too. What she didn't tell anyone, not her father, not Amanda, not even herself fully, was that she was already imagining the line. Already imagining lying prone on the mat, scope pressed to her eye, the world shrinking down to a reticle and a distant target that dared her to try. And though she would never have admitted it aloud, the thought made her smile in the dark. Because something inside whispered, what if? What if she failed? The thought pressed against Sarah's chest as she parked outside the private range for her first real attempt. Her father had insisted she take one of the shop's best precision rifles, a heavy, immaculate piece she had cleaned dozens of times but never fired. The case lay in the truck bed like a secret she wasn't sure she deserved to open. For 2 weeks she had replayed the Desert Valley match in her head, Morrison's voice explaining wind drift, Diana's calm, surgeon-like focus, the way every shot seemed like a promise between shooter and rifle, kept or broken with brutal honesty. Now it was her turn. She tightened her grip on the steering wheel and whispered to herself, just try. The range stretched out across desert scrubland. It wasn't the official competition setup she had seen last month, but it was no less intimidating. Targets lined the ground at 300, 500, 800 meters, each one waiting to expose her inexperience. She felt her throat dry as she carried the case toward the group of shooters gathered casually at the benches. Diana saw her first. "Sarah, you made it." Her smile was easy, unforced, like she had expected Sarah all along. That helped, just a little. Introductions followed. Tom Bradley, retired military sniper, weathered but kind-eyed. Maria Santos, a young engineer whose laughter cut through the desert air, making everything feel less formal. Their equipment looked intimidating. Computers, wind meters, logbooks filled with numbers Sarah couldn't yet understand. But Diana spoke gently. Everyone here started at zero. Today it's about learning. Learning, that word again. Sarah clung to it. Tom laid out a mat and gestured for her to unpack the rifle. First lesson, consistency. Every shot is a repeat of the one before it. Same position, same breathing, same trigger squeeze. Doesn't matter if it's 300 or 1,000 meters. Consistency wins. Sarah knelt, hands trembling just enough to make latching the case awkward. When she finally lifted the rifle free, it felt different than it ever had in the shop. Heavier. Not just steel and wood now, but potential. She lay flat, awkwardly pressing into the mat. The rifle dug into her shoulder, foreign despite its familiarity. Tom crouched beside her, adjusting her elbows, shifting her cheek weld. Comfort and stability, he said. You're not fighting the rifle, you're building a system with it. Through the scope, the 300-meter target swam into focus. It looked small, impossibly far for her first attempt. She forced herself to breathe, to steady, to listen to Tom's calm voice guiding her rhythm. Exhale, pause, slow squeeze. Don't think about the bang, just let it break. The shot cracked across the valley. For a heartbeat, silence. Then Tom chuckled, low and surprised. Well, damn. Sarah blinked. What? Look, Diana said, handing her binoculars. Through the glass, Sarah saw the hole, just off-center, a clean mark against the steel. Her stomach dropped. That couldn't be hers, but it was. Try again, Diana urged softly. She swallowed, reset her breathing, realigned the scope. This time she was conscious of her movements, deliberate, trying to replicate every detail exactly. The shot rang out. Closer to center. Maria laughed, shaking her head. Took me 6 months to land groups like that. You're kidding us, right? Practicing in secret. Sarah's cheeks burned. No, I just... But she didn't have words. What she had was a thundering heartbeat, and a flicker of pride that terrified her almost as much as it thrilled. They moved her back to 500 meters. Tom explained wind drift, showed her how mirage lines shimmered like invisible rivers across the heat. Sarah narrowed her eyes, studying the faint patterns. Somehow, her mind latched onto them the way it latched onto tiny imperfections in a rifle's chamber. She could see the invisible push. Her shot landed just outside the inner ring. Diana leaned forward, eyebrows raised. You're reading the wind already. Sarah bit her lip, unsure. I just saw the waves like heat bending. That's exactly it, Diana said, almost stunned. You see what most beginners miss for months. Each shot after grew steadier. 500 meters became less impossible, less terrifying, more like solving the puzzles she had always loved in the shop. She adjusted, corrected, studied her results, applied the changes, and the rifle listened. By late afternoon, Sarah was landing hits at 600 meters with a consistency that left the group quietly exchanging looks behind her back. She pretended not to notice, though she caught Tom murmuring to Diana, "She's got it. Never seen someone take to it this fast." When they finally packed up, Maria slipped her a flyer for a beginner's match. "You should come, seriously, you've got something." The words stuck in Sarah's chest all the way home. That night, Amanda called, half joking. "So you spent your Saturday lying in the dirt with old men and guns?" Sarah hesitated, kind of. "And was it fun?" That word felt too small. Fun was movies, coffee, lazy afternoons. This had been something else, raw, exacting, almost frightening in its pull. But she couldn't explain that, so she just whispered, "Yeah, it was fun." Her father waited up, sipping tea at the kitchen table. His eyes were sharp but softened when she described the day. "Your grandfather always said knowing rifles isn't the same as shooting them," he murmured. "But maybe you got both." Sarah lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling. She could still feel the rifle against her shoulder, the echo of each shot humming in her bones. For the first time, her world felt bigger than the shop walls. But underneath, the thrill was a fear she couldn't name. What if this wasn't luck? What if this was who she was? And deeper still, a whisper she tried to silence. What if they expected her to prove it? Why had she agreed to this? The thought hammered at Sarah's chest as she sat in her truck, staring at the registration tent of her first competition. Her hands gripped the steering wheel until her knuckles whitened. She could still back out. She could put the truck in gear, drive home, and pretend she had never even thought about competing. But Maria's words echoed in her mind. You've got something. Don't waste it. And Diana's calm smile. Everyone starts somewhere. Somewhere for Sarah, that somewhere was here, an open range under the Arizona sun, filled with people who carried themselves with quiet certainty. They weren't nervous. They weren't doubting. They belonged. She wasn't sure she did. Taking a breath that didn't seem to fill her lungs, she finally pushed the door open. The desert air was sharp, dry, unrelenting. Her boots felt heavy as she stepped onto the gravel path leading toward the crowd of competitors unpacking gear that looked more advanced than anything she had touched. Her rifle felt suddenly small, ordinary. At the check-in table, a man handed her a number tag with the easy indifference of someone who had seen 100 faces just like hers. Novice Division. Good. Welcome. First stage starts in 20 minutes. Her throat tightened. Diana appeared then like a steadying anchor. She wore a cap pulled low, her eyes hidden in shadow, but her presence alone was grounding. "You're here," she said softly, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Sarah nodded stiffly. Words failed her. Diana guided her to a shaded bench where other novices sat fidgeting with their rifles. One boy, barely older than Sarah, stared at his scope as though willing it to grant him courage. Another competitor tapped his leg endlessly, the rhythm betraying nerves he was trying to mask. Sarah felt less alone seeing their fear. The first stage was at 400 meters. Simple, Diana explained. 5 shots, steel plates, no tricks, just breathe, steady, fire. Simple, Sarah thought bitterly, had never felt so complicated. When her number was called, she walked to the firing line with legs that trembled. The world seemed sharper, sounds louder, the smell of dust stronger, the weight of the rifle like lead against her shoulder. She lay prone, trying to remember Tom's words. Consistency, same as before. But this wasn't before. This was now, with eyes on her, pressure burning like a hand at the back of her neck. Her first shot cracked across the valley. Miss. Her stomach dropped. The spotter called it out, voice clipped. Low right. Heat flushed her skin. She adjusted, forced her breath slower, squeezed again. The second bullet struck metal with a sharp ping. Relief flooded her chest so fast she nearly gasped. The third, another hit. The fourth barely clipped the edge, but it counted. The fifth clean, solid. She rolled onto her back, staring up at the endless sky, her chest heaving. She had survived. Not perfect, but not failure either. And for the first time, she felt the strange taste of competition. Not just shooting, but fighting herself. Fighting the voice that had whispered she didn't belong. Stage after stage pushed her farther. 600 meters, 800. Each distance carried new challenges, gusts of wind that mocked her corrections, heat shimmer that made targets dance like illusions. Sometimes she missed. Sometimes she hit. Each shot carved deeper into her awareness of how fragile precision really was. Between rounds, Diana knelt beside her, whispering small corrections, encouragements so soft they barely reached her ears. Trust the process. Don't chase perfection. One shot at a time. But even with guidance, Sarah struggled. At 800 meters, she missed her first 3 shots entirely, the steel target untouched, mocking her through the scope. Rage bubbled under her skin, rage at herself, at her shaking hands, at the voice that said Morrison and Diana had been wrong about her. She closed her eyes. And for a moment she thought about the shop, The quiet of the workbench, the way she had always approached each rifle as if it were a puzzle solved piece by piece, not rushed, not panicked. She opened her eyes, steadier now, and realigned her scope. Fourth shot hit, fifth shot another. Not perfect, but enough. By the end of the day, her scores placed her third in the novice division. Not first, not flawless, but her name was called, her place acknowledged. As she stood at the small podium clutching a paper certificate, applause echoing faintly, Sarah felt a strange mix of pride and doubt. Pride because she had stood here at all. Doubt because she knew deep inside that luck had carried her more than skill. That night, lying in bed, the applause replayed in her mind. It didn't sound triumphant. It sounded like a question. Was she good enough, or just lucky today? Her father found her staring at her rifle the next morning, eyes red from lack of sleep. "You're thinking too much," he said quietly. "Maybe I'm not cut out for this." Miguel sat heavily, his joints stiff, his face lined with years of both work and love. "Sarah, do you know why your grandfather taught me to clean rifles before he ever let me fire one?" She shook her head. "Because cleaning teaches respect, patience, consistency. It teaches you that every detail matters. Shooting is the same. You already know how to respect the rifle. The rest will come." She wanted to believe him, but believing was harder than cleaning. Weeks passed. She practiced endlessly with Diana, Tom, Maria. Each session revealed flaws she hadn't noticed before, her breathing uneven, her grip inconsistent, her mind distracted by pressure. And yet she grew, slowly, painfully. Every miss taught her something. Every hit reminded her it was possible. 3 months later, she entered another competition. This time, she wasn't third. She was first in her division. But even with the medal in her hand, she didn't feel finished. She felt chased. Chased by the idea that someone would eventually see through her, realize she wasn't as talented as they thought. That night, staring at the small circle of gold, she whispered to herself, "I have to prove it wasn't luck." But prove it to whom? That was the question she couldn't answer. How far could she go before she broke? The question haunted Sarah in quiet moments. The long drives to practice, the silence of the shop when her father had already gone to bed, the pause between each shot when she lay prone on the mat, the world narrowed to reticle and steel. She had medals now, certificates pinned carelessly to her wall. To others, they looked like proof. To Sarah, they felt like questions disguised as victories. Because every hit still left her wondering if it had been skill or luck, and every miss reminded her how fragile her confidence truly was. She didn't tell anyone how often she woke in the middle of the night, breath shallow, reliving missed shots like failures carved into her skin. She didn't tell Amanda. Her best friend had grown tired of hearing about targets and wind flags anyway. She didn't tell her father, who watched her with quiet pride and worry. She didn't even tell Diana, though the older woman seemed to see more than Sarah ever said aloud. Instead, she buried it. She trained. Diana pushed her harder now. Every session carried new demands, shots from kneeling, standing, in shifting winds under time pressure. "It's not about comfort," Diana explained one afternoon as Sarah fought to steady herself against a gusting crosswind. "It's about adapting faster than the environment can beat you." Tom's lessons were harsher. "Stop thinking like a kid," he barked one day when Sarah hesitated too long on the trigger. "This isn't art class. Pull it clean, commit, or don't bother showing up." Even Maria, usually lighthearted, grew serious. She drilled Sarah on mental focus, breathing patterns, visualization, the discipline of treating every shot as if it were the only one that mattered. "The bullet doesn't care if you're nervous," she said softly one evening. "It only cares about physics, so take yourself out of the equation." Sarah absorbed it all, hungry and desperate. Each correction stung, but each success carved a deeper certainty into her bones. Her scores rose, slowly, steadily. At her third competition, she didn't just place, she dominated her division. At her fourth, she was bumped into the intermediate bracket, standing against shooters with years more experience. She didn't win, but she didn't fold either. Still, the whisper never left. What if you're not enough? That whisper grew louder the day Tom handed her a packet at the range. State championship, he said simply. Sarah blinked down at the papers. Dozens of pages detailing rules, distances, entry requirements. Her eyes snagged on the numbers: 800 meters, 1,200, even 1,500. Her stomach tightened. That's farther than I've ever. Good, Tom cut her off. Then you'll learn. The packet felt heavier than paper had a right to feel. It wasn't just information. It was a doorway. But doorways carried risks. That night, Sarah spread the papers across her bed, staring at the charts and requirements. Her lamp cast harsh shadows across the pages, making the numbers seem larger, more impossible. She thought about the shop, about her father's lined hands, about the quiet safety of cleaning rifles with no one watching. And she thought about Morrison's eyes the first time he had examined her work, sharp, searching, as if he had seen something she hadn't yet dared to claim. Could she step through this doorway? She didn't answer, not yet. Weeks bled into months of preparation. Diana worked as her spotter now, teaching her to read wind at longer distances, to measure mirage with practiced eyes. Together they studied charts, calculated bullet drops, adjusted for humidity and elevation. The math was dizzying, but to Sarah it felt strangely familiar, like the hidden mechanics she had always loved in rifle maintenance, now stretched into the air itself. Still, mistakes haunted her. At 1,000 meters, her bullets sometimes drifted yards off target. At 1,200, she missed entirely more often than not. Every failure clawed at her self-belief. "You're not ready," she muttered to herself one late evening, collapsing beside her rifle in frustration. Diana crouched next to her, voice calm but firm. "No one is ever ready for distances like these. You grow into them, shot by shot, failure by failure. That's the only way." Sarah wanted to believe her. She wanted to trust the process. But part of her still feared she was an imposter, cleaning girl dressed up as a shooter, pretending at skills she didn't own. The state championship loomed. Competitors arrived from across the Southwest, their cases heavier, their names recognized from forums and magazines Sarah had read in secret late at night. She felt small among them, small and unworthy. Until Tom pulled her aside. "There's another bracket," he said quietly. "Extreme long range, 1,500 meters." Sarah froze. "That's almost a mile." "Yeah." His eyes narrowed. "And you qualify barely, but you qualify." The air left her lungs. 1,500 meters wasn't shooting. It was something else. A place where bullets flew for seconds before landing, where the earth spun itself twisted trajectories, where even seasoned veterans failed more often than they succeeded. She shook her head. "I can't." "You can," Tom interrupted. "You already see wind better than most. You already understand mechanics better than half the field. The only question is whether you'll try." That night, Sarah spread ballistics charts across her kitchen table, her eyes burning as she traced numbers she barely understood. She wanted to run, to hide back in the safety of maintenance and cleaning, where nothing risked exposing her as a fraud. But another voice whispered through the fear, "What if you can?" The next day, she signed the form. Her father watched her with quiet worry as she slid the paper into the envelope. "Are you sure about this, Sarah?" "No," she admitted softly. But she mailed it anyway. What happens when the bullet never arrives? That was Sarah's first thought the day she tried 1,500 meters. She lay prone, cheek pressed to the stock, breath steady, crosshairs floating over a steel plate so far away it looked like a speck against the desert ridge. She squeezed the trigger, felt the recoil, heard the rifle's crack echo back from the hills. Then nothing. No sound of impact, no satisfying ping, just silence stretching across the distance until it felt like the shot itself had disappeared. Her chest tightened. She tried again. Another crack, another pause, another hollow absence. Miss. Tom crouched behind her, voice low. Don't panic. This is what 1,500 feels like. Every mistake is multiplied, every breath, every calculation. Sarah wanted to nod, to accept the lesson calmly, but rage prickled under her skin. She had worked so hard to get here. She had trusted the math, trusted her form. And yet, her bullets seemed to vanish into thin air. By the fourth shot, her hands were trembling. She pulled the trigger too hard, jerking the reticle off target. Miss again. Diana placed a hand on her shoulder. Breathe, reset. You're not failing, you're learning. But it didn't feel like learning. It felt like exposure, like proof that all along she had been pretending. That night, Sarah sat in her truck long after the others had gone, staring at her reflection in the dark windshield. Her eyes looked different, harder, tired. Maybe I'm not cut out for this, she whispered. But the next morning, she was back at the range. And the next. Each day, Diana drilled her on wind calls, making her read mirage and vegetation, testing her with impossible guesses until her instincts sharpened. Tom pushed her ruthlessly, forcing her to shoot under time pressure, to adapt when flags shifted mid-shot, to calculate quickly or lose the opportunity. Still, progress was slow. At 300 meters, Sarah felt in control. At 600, confident. At 1,000, tested but capable. But at 1,500, she felt small, helpless. Like the rifle no longer obeyed her, like physics itself mocked her efforts. Until the day Dr. Robert Chen arrived. He wasn't a shooter, not in the way Tom or Diana were. He was a ballistics engineer, a quiet man with glasses and a laptop that seemed to hold entire worlds of numbers. Tom introduced him casually. This is Chen. He'll help with the science side. Chen set up equipment Sarah had never seen, sensors that tracked wind layers, software that mapped bullet paths through invisible currents of air. He showed her graphs, calculations, lines that twisted like rivers across the screen. At 1,500 meters, Chen explained, you're not firing in one environment. You're firing through many. Wind near the muzzle is one thing. Wind halfway downrange is another. Temperature gradients, pressure layers, even the curvature of the earth, everything bends the bullet's path. Sarah tried to follow, but the words felt like another language. Chen noticed her blank stare. He smiled faintly. Think of it like cleaning a rifle. Every detail matters. Every speck of dust changes performance. Out here, the air itself is the rifle. You have to clean it with your mind. The metaphor struck her. Suddenly, the impossible didn't feel mystical. It felt technical. She leaned closer to the screen, tracing the graphs with her fingertip. So, if I read the mirage here, I'm reading only one layer. Exactly, Chen said, pleased. And the bullet will pass through 5 or 6 layers before impact. That's why your misses feel random. They're not random, you're just blind to the layers you didn't see. It was overwhelming, but it was also solvable. For weeks, Chen became part of the team. He taught Sarah to think like an engineer, to calculate not just one correction but multiple possibilities, to predict how unseen air currents might tug at the bullet mid-flight. Diana translated the science into practical spotting calls, and Tom hammered her into applying it under pressure. The first time she landed a clean hit at 1,500 meters, she almost didn't believe it. The shot cracked, the second stretch, then ping. Faint, distant, delayed, but real. Her breath caught. Her hands shook as she lifted her head from the scope. Diana grinned. Tom just muttered about time. But Sarah's heart was racing. She had thought the bullet would never arrive, and yet it had. That night, lying in bed, she replayed the sound over and over in her head, the long silence, the faint metallic answer. It was more than a hit. It was proof. Proof that the impossible wasn't impossible after all. Still, doubt lingered. For every hit, there were misses. Sometimes entire strings of shots vanished into the desert without a trace. Some days, Sarah went home so frustrated she nearly threw her rifle back in its case. But each failure taught her something. Each silence dared her to listen harder. At dinner one evening, her father studied her as she poked at her food absent-mindedly. "You're carrying something heavy," Miguel said softly. Sarah sighed. "I'm not sure I can do this, Dad. It's too much, too far. Every mistake feels like proof I'm not enough." Her father's eyes softened. "Do you remember when you were little and you couldn't thread a cleaning rod through the barrel? You'd cry and throw it down, say you weren't strong enough." Sarah managed a small smile. She remembered. "And what did I tell you?" "That it wasn't about strength," she murmured. "It was about patience." Miguel nodded. "This is the same, patience, Sarah, not perfection." The word stayed with her. Weeks turned into months. The state championship crept closer. Sarah's scores improved, slowly, painfully, but undeniably. Her groups at 1,500 shrank from scatterings to clusters. Her wind calls grew sharper, her corrections faster. She still missed, but less often. Then one evening, after a long session, Tom pulled Diana aside. Sarah caught only fragments of their hushed voices. "She's ready," Tom said. "Ready for what?" Diana asked. "The real test," he replied, "beyond this." Sarah's chest tightened. The real test, beyond 1,500. She didn't ask that night. She wasn't sure she wanted the answer. But deep inside she knew there was always something farther. Always another distance waiting. What did she think she was doing here? The question struck Sarah the moment she stepped onto the grounds of the Arizona State Precision Rifle Championship. Trucks and trailers lined the desert lot, bristling with equipment cases worth more than her father's entire shop inventory. Competitors moved with quiet efficiency, their rifles gleaming, their confidence unshaken. These weren't casual shooters. These were the names she'd read in magazines, the ones she had whispered about in late-night forums, the shooters she had watched on grainy YouTube clips and thought belonged to another world. And now she was expected to stand among them. Her rifle case felt heavier than it ever had. Her throat was tight, every breath scraped like sand. She wanted to vanish into the dust and watch from afar like before, but it was too late. Her name was already on the roster, her number already pinned to her chest. "Don't overthink it," Diana murmured, adjusting her own cap. "One shot at a time. We do what we've trained to do, nothing more." Sarah clung to the word like a lifeline. Because she wasn't alone, not anymore. Diana had agreed to serve as her spotter for the championship. Their partnership had grown over months of training, Sarah on the rifle, Diana reading wind, calculating corrections, whispering adjustments in the space between heartbeats. At the line, they worked as one system, shooter and spotter, execution and analysis. But still, Sarah's nerves churned as the first stage began. Targets at 800 meters, 10 shots, steel plates no larger than a dinner plate. She lay prone, heart hammering, the desert heat rippling across the valley. Through her scope, the target wavered like a mirage. Her hands shook as she gripped the stock. "Wind from the left," Diana whispered. "Half-mil hold, breathe, break steady." Sarah exhaled, pressed the trigger, the rifle cracked. Ping! The sound carried back faint but unmistakable. A hit. Relief surged through her chest, nearly overwhelming. She wanted to collapse with gratitude, but Diana's voice kept her anchored. "Again, same hold. Stay calm." Second shot, ping. Third, ping. Not perfect. She missed the fourth, the bullet whipped by a sudden gust. But Diana adjusted her correction instantly, and Sarah trusted her. Together, they carved a respectable score, enough to place her near the top third of the field. Not first, not flashy, but steady. Stage after stage pushed harder. 1,000 meters, 1,200, complex firing positions, time constraints. Sarah stumbled at times, once fumbling with a bipod, once losing precious seconds recalculating wind. But each time Diana's calm presence pulled her back, and each time Sarah recovered. By the end of the second day, she wasn't leading, but she wasn't sinking either. She was holding her place, surprising even herself. That night, lying in her motel bed, Sarah stared at the ceiling fan spinning shadows across the room. She should have felt proud, but instead she felt restless. Because she could sense it, something beyond this, something looming. Her instincts were right. On the morning of the third day, Tom found her near the staging area, a stack of papers in his hands. "There's something else you should see," he said, voice low. Sarah frowned, taking the papers. Charts, numbers, rules. At the top, bold letters, extreme long-range division. Her stomach flipped. 1,500 meters, she whispered. "Not just that," Tom said. "Up to 2,000, maybe beyond." She stared at him, throat dry. "That's insane." Tom shrugged. "Insane, maybe, but you qualify, barely, and you've been shooting like someone who belongs here." Sarah wanted to laugh, to shove the papers back, to say no, but her fingers clung to them. Because some part of her, the part that had stayed up nights studying ballistics tables, the part that had refused to quit after misses, whispered, "What if you can?" She didn't sleep that night. She sat at the motel desk with the papers spread before her, tracing the numbers with trembling hands. She thought about the shop, the years of cleaning rifles, the steady patience her father had taught her. And she thought about Morrison's words the first day they met. "This is exceptional work." Could she prove it wasn't just maintenance, that she could wield the precision she had once only preserved? By dawn, she had signed the entry form. The extreme long-range stage was unlike anything she had ever seen. Targets so far they seemed imaginary. Competitors armed with rifles so large, so specialized, they looked like artillery stripped down for personal use. Weather stations, laptops, spotters with years of experience. Sarah's knees nearly buckled when she stepped to the line. But Diana was there. Calm, steady. "Trust the process," she whispered. "Same as before, just farther." The first shot cracked, vanished into silence, then ping. Not center, not perfect, but a hit. Sarah almost laughed out loud. Relief and disbelief tangled in her chest. The second missed, caught by an invisible crosswind. The third corrected. The fourth grazed. The fifth landed solid. By the end, her score placed her among the top 5 in the extreme bracket. It didn't feel real. Standing among competitors she had once admired from afar, Sarah felt both proud and terrified. Proud because she had held her own. Terrified because she knew the distances didn't end here. Later that evening, as she packed her rifle away, Tom approached quietly. "You've heard of the 3,800-meter test?" he asked. Sarah froze. "That's not real, that's a myth." Tom's eyes were steady. "It's real, and if you keep going, if you keep proving yourself, they'll ask you to take it." Her heart pounded in her chest. 3,800 meters, over 2 miles. A shot so long it sounded like fiction. She didn't answer, she couldn't. But the whisper in her chest grew louder. "What if? How do you aim at something you can't even see?" That was Sarah's first thought when Diana set up the spotting scope and pointed toward the distant ridgeline. 3,800 meters, nearly 2.5 miles. Through the glass, the target wasn't a target at all. It was a blur, a pale shape barely distinguishable from the rock and haze. She lay prone, rifle anchored into the dirt, scope dialed to maximum magnification. The reticle floated across nothingness. She swallowed hard. "This is impossible." Diana's voice was steady. So was 1,500 once. But this was different. At 1,500 she could see the plate, could at least believe it was real. At 3,800 the shot felt less like aiming and more like gambling against the earth itself. Still she steadied her breathing, aligned the crosshairs, pulled the trigger. The rifle cracked. and the bullet vanished. Seconds stretched, 4, 5, 6, no impact, no sound. High, far right, Diana finally called, squinting through advanced optics, almost 200 meters off. Sarah's stomach dropped. 200 meters. That wasn't a miss. That was failure on a scale that made her earlier mistakes seem laughable. She tried again, adjusted, corrected, fired, miss. Third attempt, miss. By the fifth shot, her hands shook. "I can't do this," she whispered. Tom, watching from behind, folded his arms. "Then stop, walk away, but if you stay, own it, no excuses." His bluntness stung, but beneath it Sarah recognized a choice: walk away or stay and bleed for this. She stayed. Days blurred into weeks of relentless training. Dr. Chen rejoined them, this time with more equipment than Sarah thought possible: computers modeling atmospheric pressure, sensors mapping wind at different altitudes, even laser rangefinders that measured mirage like shifting rivers of heat. "This isn't marksmanship," Chen said quietly one evening as they studied graphs under the fatting sun. "This is engineering, meteorology, patience, and luck braided together. At 3,800, you're not aiming at the target. You're aiming at where the target will be when the bullet arrives." Sarah tried to grasp it, but the science felt overwhelming. Coriolis effect, spin drift, density altitude, words that belonged in physics textbooks, not in the hands of a girl who had once just cleaned rifles in her father's shop. More often than not, her shots disappeared into silence. Hours of training ended with nothing but frustration, her face pressed against the dirt, tears she wouldn't let anyone see. One night, alone in her truck, she whispered into the steering wheel, "You don't belong here, Sarah. You never did." But the next morning, she showed up again. And slowly something shifted. Not in a moment of triumph, but in the accumulation of failures. Each miss taught her something: the angle of wind she hadn't accounted for, the subtle shimmer in the air that meant pressure layers were twisting her bullet, the fractional adjustment in her trigger pull that cost her precious yards. The first time she hit steel at 3,800, it felt like a miracle. The shot cracked, seconds stretched, then a faint, delayed ping floated back across the valley. Her breath caught, her eyes blurred. She had done it. Not luck, not an accident, a hit. Diana clapped her shoulder, eyes shining. Even Tom allowed himself the faintest of smiles. But the victory was fragile. The next 5 shots missed again, scattering across the desert. Sarah's frustration flared, but this time she didn't break. She steadied, learned, tried again. "Consistency," Diana reminded her, "not perfection. The distance doesn't care about your pride, it only cares about your patience." Sarah repeated the words to herself like prayer. Consistency, not perfection. Still, the toll was heavy. She barely ate. She fell asleep over ballistics charts. Her hands ached from hours of shooting. Miguel watched her with quiet worry, his eyes full of questions he didn't ask. "Why are you doing this, Sarah?" he finally asked one night over dinner. She hesitated, staring at her food. Why? Because Morrison had believed in her, because Diana had guided her, because Tom had pushed her. "No." She lifted her eyes to her father's. "Because I need to know, if I can, if I'm capable of more than just cleaning rifles." Miguel's face softened, but his voice was firm. "Then don't forget, your worth isn't measured in meters. It's measured in how you carry yourself, hit or miss." The words sank deep, though she didn't fully understand them yet. Weeks later, the day came for her official trial run. The national team was watching: coaches, officers, competitors whose names carried weight. Sarah lay prone again, rifle aligned on the impossible target. Her heart pounded so hard she thought it might shake her aim. "Wind left," Diana murmured. 1.2 mils, elevation's clean, trust it." Sarah exhaled, pulled the trigger. Crack. Seconds stretched. Ping. The sound was faint, delayed, but real. A hit. The crowd behind her stirred. A murmur ran through the watching competitors. Second shot miss, third miss, fourth hit again, fifth closer still. By the end of the sequence, Sarah had landed enough to prove she wasn't a fluke. She had engaged the target at 3,800 meters, something most shooters never even attempted. When she lifted her head from the scope, Diana was smiling. Tom nodded once, firm and proud. But Sarah wasn't smiling, because she knew this wasn't the end. It was only the beginning of something even heavier. That night, lying awake in the dark, she whispered to herself, "What if the test isn't about the shot? What if it's about me?" And she knew the answer would come soon. What if she failed in front of everyone? That was the thought Sarah carried as she stepped onto the firing line at the national championship. The desert stretched endlessly before her, shimmering in the afternoon heat. The air was restless, the kind of wind that shifted without warning, mocking every calculation. Behind her stood dozens of spectators, competitors she had once idolized, coaches with clipboards, and her father, Miguel, leaning quietly on his cane. Diana was beside her, spotting scope set, ballistics charts pinned by stones against the gusts. Tom hovered at the edge of the line, arms folded, expression unreadable. And somewhere in the crowd, whispers traveled like wildfire. "She's just a kid. 2 years ago she was cleaning rifles. 3,800 meters. She doesn't stand a chance." Sarah lowered herself to the mat. Her hands trembled as she opened the rifle case. The weapon gleamed in the sun, a custom-built long-range system, finely tuned, prepared to stretch physics to its limits. She had cleaned every piece twice the night before, her ritual of respect, the only thing that calmed her nerves. Diana's voice cut gently through the noise. "This isn't about proving them wrong. It's about proving to yourself that you belong here." Sarah nodded faintly, though doubt still coiled tight in her chest. She settled behind the rifle. Through the scope, the target was a ghost, a pale blur on the far ridge, so faint it seemed to vanish each time the heat shimmered. She steadied her breathing, adjusted her grip, and pressed her cheek against the stock. "Wind shifting," Diana murmured, eyes glued to her scope. "Hold 2 mils left. Elevation's good. You've got this." Sarah exhaled. Her finger tightened on the trigger. The rifle cracked. The bullet vanished into the distance. 1 second, 2, 3, 4. No sound, no ping. "Miss." Her stomach dropped. The crowd behind her shifted, the weight of their silence heavier than words. Diana stayed calm. Impact was low, add .3 elevation, same wind. Sarah adjusted, tried again, crack. The shot stretched into eternity. Ping. Faint, delayed, but real. A hit. Relief surged through her chest. She wanted to cry, to laugh, to collapse all at once, but there was no time. "Stay steady," Diana said. "Don't ride the high, next shot." Sarah wiped sweat from her brow, steadied her breath. Crack, another shot, seconds stretched. Ping. Closer this time. The crowd stirred. A murmur rippled through the air. They were watching now, not skeptics, but witnesses. Third shot miss, fourth grazed. Her pulse thundered. Her body ached from the tension. By the fifth, she could feel the weight of it pressing on her. This was the shot that mattered most. She closed her eyes briefly. In the silence, she thought of the shop, of her father's hands guiding hers as a child, teaching her patience with cleaning rods and brushes, of Morrison's surprise the first time he saw her work, of Diana's steady encouragement, of Tom's brutal honesty. She opened her eyes. The reticle floated over the ghostly target. Her breath slowed, in-out pause. Crack. The seconds stretched unbearably. 4, 5, 6. Ping. Clean, solid center. The sound carried back, faint but undeniable. The crowd erupted, applause, disbelief, voices rising like a wave. But Sarah barely heard them. She stayed frozen behind the rifle, tears pricking her eyes, the echo of that ping reverberating through her chest. She had done it. Not perfectly, not without failure, but she had done it. When she finally lifted her head, Diana's smile was wide, her eyes shining. Tom gave her the smallest nod of respect, a nod that said, "You've earned this." And then she saw her father. Miguel stood at the edge of the crowd, his eyes wet, his hands trembling as he clapped slowly, reverently. Their gazes met across the distance, and Sarah felt the years between them collapse, the girl who once only cleaned rifles, and the woman now who had fired one farther than almost anyone ever had. The ceremony later felt surreal. Coaches shook her hand. Competitors she had once idolized patted her shoulder. Words like national team and international stage floated in the air, but Sarah barely heard them. Because in her heart she knew the truth. The victory wasn't the hit. The victory was the journey, the countless misses, the silent nights of doubt, the mornings she had forced herself to show up anyway. The victory was in knowing she had faced something that once felt impossible and chosen not to run. As the sun sank low over the desert, painting the sky in shades of fire and shadow, Sarah stood quietly at the edge of the range, her rifle case beside her. She didn't need to say anything. Because sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.